All right, everybody, good evening and welcome to IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and your premier news program for practical spiritual advice in your everyday life. IKYA Live is a unique news program where we take a topic from the day and we unpack it. We look deep inside at the spiritual principles at play, and then with IKYA spiritual teacher, we lift our consciousness. We try to see a bigger picture, take a higher perspective, and in so doing, perhaps become leaders of healing, growth, and love in the world instead of just following along with the negative news of the day as they tell it. So, tonight, before we get started, already down below, like tonight's episode and share it with fellow spiritual seekers, family, and friends. Our topic tonight is the global human population, and it really does apply to absolutely everybody. And there's going to be some surprises tonight, I think, for a lot of us. So be sure to share it so that people can join along and also bring their surprise, their questions, their comments, their perspectives to tonight's conversation. Because IKYA Live is a different kind of news program. It's really a discussion between spiritual teacher IKYA and us, spiritual seekers and students who are seeking to also understand better how the world works. So go ahead and follow us and share tonight's episode as well on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We are IKYA.official on all channels. And if you can't join live tonight, you'll be able to follow up and watch it again on our YouTube channel. So go ahead now, do that, because we want to dive in and have a really engaging conversation tonight. So write your questions in down below in the comments, and I'll feed them to IKYA. And we also have a live studio audience with questions. And we're going to dive in now to the global population, and the question that we pose tonight is actually population collapse. Is the decline of our human population really the biggest threat to humanity? And I, for one, can say I was really surprised when we brought this topic up, because I grew up with overpopulation, too many people on the planet being the big issue. And yet it looks like the picture has drastically changed. So IKYA, let's get started and ask, what is going on with the picture of human population?
I think this is a fascinating topic because it's not something that most people are aware of yet. But I think that is about to change because we have a global economy and a civilization where everything is based on exponential growth in everything, right? The economy simply means we need to produce more all the time. We need to increase the amount of money, that thing. And that requires that we have more consumers, more people, more everything. So it's a machine that's designed to like spiral up and more of everything every day. And we've reached a point where that's not happening in so many different ways. And our system is not based on that. It's but let's keep growing, and we can't. And there are many reasons for this. We see the trend very clearly in industrialized countries. And the reason for this, of course, is mostly women having access to education and information and gradually becoming more independent. Now, if we go back in time, right, a female's only true ambition would be to have kids. It would be also the way that she could secure herself. So by getting married and having kids, her life was set, right? Because she depended completely on the man and the family and all of that. She did not have any individual rights or necessarily any individual financial security. So when that started to change, women could identify something else than just a mother, and they didn't need kids to survive, right? Women would normally have kids from the age of 14, right? And now women are getting kids later and later in life. But it's because women, of course, live their own lives, figure out what they want. And for a society, we need the best people in everything. But now we also have the problem with women not wanting as many kids or as quickly. So in our part of the world, women have kids later and later, sometimes like in their 30s. And it used to be in their teens. And they used to have like 8 kids. Now often one will have 1 or 2. So we are below replacement, meaning that we are declining in population. And we're getting fewer and fewer. And it's happening so fast because growth is exponentially. Because if you think that you increase the number of people, you also increase the number of people having kids, right? So it will grow this way. And the same thing happens with the decline. When you have fewer kids, it means you have fewer adults to have even fewer kids, right? So it goes downhill very fast, and we've come to a tipping point. Even India is a country that is now below replacement in birth rate. In Europe, that has happened a long time ago. And the only kind of increase in population is by immigration. And immigrants still have more kids for now. But that will also change as women get more rights. So you see it in all industrialized countries. China is off the deep end already. It's happening so quickly because China has moved from 0 to 100 very quickly, and they have then adapted our ways and our habits and how we live, right? And now they're just getting there where they're starting to experience the same problems we have. I talked to, Chinese contacts a few years ago, and they said, like, even then, it had become very trendy for, upper middle class Chinese families to quit their high, tech jobs or whatever and buy a vineyard in the countryside. Like, they're already reached that level. So they're not behind us anymore. They're actually moving past us with the same type of challenges and problems that we're facing. And in China, because of everything that comes with our civilization, the focus on the individual, career, all of that, Chinese women are not as willing to have as many kids and as fast. So in China, there will very soon be in a situation where there are kind of more retired people than workers. It's happening very fast. And the prediction is that their population will be basically halved by the end of the century. And that could happen globally, that we will be down to 4 billion people by the end of the century. That's a likely prognosis. So, and it's basically because we want freedom, right? We want to live our own lives. Family is not everything anymore. And that's a good thing. But it means that, we're not having as many kids. And when you have a system, the whole infrastructure, right? When you think of the production of everything, it needs a certain amount of customers, right? And as the population gets older, they spend less money. And you have fewer people working, right? So our whole infrastructure may start to collapse unless we start kind of rebuilding and rethinking, because the population is getting older. So, and we live longer, right? So now we can expect to be 90, 100, and that will increase. And you'll have fewer younger people. So today when we think of a human, we often think of someone, late 30s or something. An average human, when we go a generation or two into the future, will be 60 years old. Right? So we're looking at the future where we have fewer people, fewer kids, and we live longer. Right? So this will represent a huge shift and the potential collapse of our entire civilization, because we keep going as if this is not happening. So when we look at solutions, because in the West, when I say, we should try to encourage people to have more kids, right? We need programs and all that. They don't work. In South Korea, they've spent more than $210 billion over the last 15 years or so incentivizing people to have more kids. It's not working. Birth rates are still dropping. So that does not work at all. People simply don't want to have kids when they're happy, right? When they live their own lives, that's what they want to do. And often in the West, well, I want a career first, right? I want to figure out who I am first, right? So it just changes how we are getting kids. And it means our civilization, if we keep going the same way, it will collapse. And that will be ugly. And it can happen very fast. Some scientists are saying like within 20 to 30 years, our entire kind of global infrastructure could collapse because there's simply not enough people to do the jobs. And then on the other side, not enough people to buy the products. So in the political kind of landscape, this is one of the reasons why one in the West has been so obsessed with immigration and getting more people, because this is something that one has been able to see since after the Second World War, when one can kind of trace these different kind of waves. So immigration was seen as the way to kind of not replace people, but because one could see that birth rate would reach a point where it would be below replacement, you would need immigration to kind of like, compensate for that. And that has worked somewhat. The challenge is now that jobs are becoming more and more specialized, right? So it's difficult when you then have immigrants that are not skilled, because we will see in the next decade or so that a lot of jobs will disappear because of AI, because of robotics. So we have a lot of people who will not fit into the new economy, right? So when we look at all of these factors, politicians really have no idea how to deal with this, right? So they're trying because it makes sense that you need more people. And immigrants, often when they come from poorer countries, they still have more kids. So you could then, have more people for a while, but it doesn't work over time. And everybody knows it. So it's still just a question of time before this tips. Now, even in Africa, one is starting to see countries moving towards birth rates below replacement. Remember that we can always see it, the wave comes later, right? Because when you look at people already being born, they will have a lifespan. But you can see based on how many are being born now and what impact that will have on the economy. So it's already starting to change in Africa too. It will just be a generation or so before we start seeing it.
We have our first question in the studio audience.
Yes, could you comment a bit more about the current non-commitment trend and the Tinder trend and all of these factors that really focus on short-term satisfaction instead of long-term dedication and commitment?
But this is part of us wanting to dissolve the nuclear family. It's a thing. Now, I've talked about how we have, a misery industrial complex, right? Because the whole machinery of the economy makes more money when we're miserable, because then we want to self-medicate, we want more stuff. We're not satisfied. And also, dissolving the family means that you have twice as many households, right? Yeah, people buy more stuff. They need like 2 cars, they need 2 of everything, and they need 2 sofas. So it's good for business. This has been a strategy. So the whole thing about gradually marketing the, the girl boss bitch thing, right? And always looking at a homemaker as stupid and as a traitor, right? And someone that is oppressed. That's been a strategy because it's good for business. And making us all single, right? And undermining commitment is always that personal freedom, which is not really freedom, because people are not happy. The happiest people are in long-term relationships. So it's a social experiment, right? Remember, it's been very short. So our genetics have not changed. So we have a new type of behavior with an old set of genetic programming, and that does not work out very well. So I've said this before, but when you look at all the surveys and all the research, religious families are happier. Kids growing up in religious families are normally happier because they have stability. They have parents that live from a specific set of values, and the rules are clear, right? Because they're taught the same values, and religious people are often more interested in kind of keeping their word, being a good person, contributing to their community, setting the example, like all of these things. And in most religions, like self-centeredness and vices are not looked upon as a good thing. So it's restraint. It's kind of controlling personal needs. So we've chosen our society to go in the opposite direction. This is part of why also we had an episode which we called You Need Jesus, because it's when you look at where we're at and how people behave when there are no kind of religious rules. In a way, it's sad to say it, but humans are not advanced enough to handle it. Right? There are often these weird ethical discussions where religious people will say, well, without God as that threat, why shouldn't we just go around like killing and raping everyone, right? What's going to stop you? And the answer is, I'm raping and killing as many people as I want to, which is zero. Because, I understand how life works. And most people, they don't see it as productive. Throughout evolution, we've figured out what works. And ethics and moral behavior has been associated with what benefits the whole group, the whole tribe, the whole community, right? It's not down to religion, but we lose that when we live in greater societies. And then the religious rules become the tribal rules that we used to have, and that we used to understand. And then we can relate to each other because through a religion, we say, right, we are on the same team. We share values. I can therefore trust you. When everybody is defining themselves, we do not know how to relate to each other, and there will be maximum conflict. So it's difficult today, right? And I think this is also partially, as I said before, why Islam is taking over, because they have that. They have a very strong sense of morals, rules, how to live, all of that. And for many people, it's better. So yes, we do a lot today that is quite hedonistic and end up being destructive. Just like, the eternal college frat party, it's fun the first day, but if that's your life, over time, it becomes destructive, and this is the modern life in the Western world. So it's interesting that having kids and having families that were always artistically looked upon as the most important thing. It was the most important thing in life. That has been downplayed. And I said being a homemaker is almost shameful. But it has opened up other avenues. Right? And it's also for us to learn as a life form, well, if this is the way forward, how do we actually deal with that? And I have quite a few solutions, so we'll get back to that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, interestingly, what you're talking about, modern spirituality seems to have contributed to this situation, because a lot of modern spirituality is all about me. It's all about my spiritual journey, my exploration, my needs and wants, and often then family and it kind of gets put to the side. Is there any way for us as modern spiritual seekers to step up and kind of combine the spiritual journey more with, supporting the population in a way?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Now, when you look at many people in modern spirituality, they're quite immature, right? So they're living the teenage dream, right, of being self-centered, irresponsible, like breaking all the rules, all of that, and that's fine for a while, because it's also a matter of figuring out who am I when I define myself, when I do what I want to do. Most people, they go through this phase and then they, mature, also spiritually, and they begin to understand that it's really not about them at all. When we connect, when we want to be in service, we understand it's not about me, it's about how much I can give to others, how much I can facilitate, how big my heart is, right? And that becomes much more important. But definitely in modern spirituality, it has a tendency to scoop up a lot of the extremely self-centered people. But they probably would not have had kids anyway because they're too busy with their own stuff. It's the same thing with people with very busy careers. It's also very self-centered, right? But overall, it's just we as a society, we have decided that having kids is not important anymore. And we need to adjust to that because it's happening all over the world, right? In South Korea, in Japan, in China, India, right? It simply happens once you get electricity. That's the start. And you've actually seen it in the West. Cities or areas that got electricity, women would utilize that time, right? It's really interesting because once you have electricity, you invent time. Because normally it would be dark and then it's, dark. With electricity, you get light and you can study, you can do things, right? You can have a life. You can become someone. And women especially, also in the West, were quite good at utilizing that. So they would read and they would, educate themselves. So that kind of started it. And you see the same thing, for instance, in African countries. Once you have electricity, women invent time. They get more time because they can start, managing their day differently, and they will educate themselves. Women are extremely smart when it comes to survival and making use of what's available to them. So that's the start. And then over time, women want more freedom and do things and define themselves and all of that, which is, of course, how it needs to be. The problem is that we as a society, we have not adjusted to that because the religion of Western capitalism, which is basically now includes the whole world, is that everything has to grow forever, right? And that can't happen. It's a silly idea. But, of course, from late 1800s until today, it has actually worked. But it's interesting also to see how things are beginning to regulate itself, because understand that the planet is also one consciousness, right? We as a life form, we share consciousness. So what we do on an individual level is just like a cell in a body. There are greater movements going on. For instance, one thing that is interesting, back to people involved in spirituality not having kids. It's not just people in spirituality. The best people normally don't have kids. And the thing is, you need to understand that the collective consciousness is kind of the consensus in the life form. When you think of survival, okay, as I explained, as always, you have a life form and then environment changes, which means that the life form will have to learn how to adapt to that. That does not happen through, meetings. It happens through random mutation, meaning that things happen, everybody reacts and is stressed out, and then over time, they will develop new ways of dealing with things, and their genetics will change, and the one with the best strategy will take over. So it's always a matter of creating that consensus of what actually works. Now, when you are someone who have great ideas, you're often outside that bubble. right? It can be consciousness work, it can be innovation, it can be whatever. But when you are kind of out there and it's not been absorbed by the collective consciousness, you will often have kind of less of an urge to have kids. Also because you're so pointed, right? You are dedicated to what you're doing, right? Because you want to move further along, you want to stretch, you want to do all of these things. So often the ones who are part of lifting and opening up and stretching and making things available for the collective consciousness, they don't have kids. People in the collective consciousness, they have more kids. And especially if you're closer to the bottom. Poor people have more kids. So that also kind of regulates the consciousness. Because consciousness can also follow genetics. So it means that the kind of collective life form will always kind of regulate itself based on what it sees as the best strategy for survival. Right? And as many of you also experience, once you have done enough growth work, you do not really identify as human anymore anyway. Right? So you're not then the best template for the collective survival. Right? So is that too? But this has been the case always. The collective consciousness will kind of regulate itself, and people within that bubble will feel that I'm part of the norm, so I should have kids. While when we're really trying to kind of probe, that will be kind of all engaging. So the collective consciousness will not therefore grow as fast as one would think. Right? Because if most of those in the higher consciousness operate outside of that bubble, and they don't have kids, the population will not be as affected by that, right? So this is also a part of it, that how kind of population is managed is very organic, and it's very interesting. And the same thing now, for instance, with our whole economic system, because it's based now on this kind of global idea, you know, that the economy is globalized, business is globalized, eternal growth. And it can't happen. So what's also happened in our consciousness is when we have started connected to each other, to the level that energetically we are becoming one life form, we said, no, we're not ready for that, right? Because humans are not ready for that. They're too attached, like to their identity, to their culture, to their country, to their ways, right? So that's been stretched. I say if we are to kind of globalize and harmonize more, then we need to grow out of our old ways. And it's a, you know, 2 step forward, 1 step back. This is a 1 step back where people are now freaking out and becoming very conservative. They identify with their culture and all of that because they need to feel that I'm part of this. I need to be in power. So now that whole kind of global mass is now breaking up. We're seeing more nationalism, right? More fascism, more all of that, which is about that conservative approach. It's saying, no, we want to be us, right? And that is happening all over the world, meaning that the kind of collective consciousness will now be split into kind of several parts. And global business will become something else. Instead of having something that's globalized, there will be several platforms. Look at the internet, for instance, right? You have the Chinese, which is a Chinese-controlled ecosystem, right? With the filters and whatever is there. Russia has its own. We have our own in the West, and there will be others. So there will be, instead of like one world, there will be several ones, different platforms. So we will be less kind of globalized, and we will go more into that identity, and then we can say, oh, we're like this, and we have to grow out of it, right? But it's just the shock of life saying, if you take one more step, that's it. That karma will be released, and you will have to deal with it. So the ego in the collective consciousness says, no, we're not ready. So everything breaks up. And it seems now, and we'll see for decades, that we're moving backwards. But it's simply that consolidation where individuals are saying, we're not ready for this. We have too many attachments, and those attachments will be forced through karmic process to be worked out, right? Because our destiny is one planet, one people. It's that. We're moving in that direction. And the funny thing is, globalization has gone too far. Because we want, as a life form, to be connected. Humans don't understand it yet, but still they do. Even in the current climate, for instance, between the United States and China, right? And you have this trade war going on and all of that, and you know, we're at the brink of a world war and all of that. At the same time, trade between China and the United States has never been higher than right now, right? You can't stop it. So it will be more kind of blockages. There will be attempts at more kind of nationalism and isolationism, but it will not work because it's obvious that we're already at that point where people demand this to become one world. We just don't want to be the ones having to adjust. The old way in the West was like, everybody will become like us, right? We have the right way of thinking. We have the right culture. We like all of that. So we were on top and the rest would want to be us. And now that is changing, right? And we have to, as one world, include everything and accept different ways, different belief systems, different philosophies, different approaches to how things are to be done, right? I've talked about human rights, for instance. And in the West, we think we have the right definition, the right understanding. But with Asian eyes, it looks very different, right? In China, they say like the most important thing for people is to have food and a home and a job and education. Freedom of speech is not that important. Because when people are asked, you know, what is more important? If they say, well, you can't discuss certain things, but you can have a home. Like, people will choose that. They will choose food security, right? But in the West, we say, nah, people should just be able to say and do whatever. And we get poor people, middle class is crumbling, and we're kind of slipping backwards. And we think, yay, human rights. While we're not helping the poor, we let people live on the street. We're not good at taking care of everyone, but at least they can say what they want, right? So there are different ways of looking at these concepts, for instance, of human rights or other value-based issues. And it will be clear that the West is not necessarily the one in the right always. So we have to learn to appreciate each other's perspective. So it's also important that this kind of global thing is breaking up, because after the Second World War, it was basically created by the United States, because they, through the Navy, could control trade, because all trade is, you know, huge, enormously huge boats. And in the old days, unless you had a Navy, you couldn't trade. Right? So now with the United States, after the Second World War kind of taking over, they ensured that you could have global business, right? And the United States is now checking out. And that means that other actors in the game can step up and be part of also setting the rules. So there are a lot of interesting things happening, but it's part of this kind of like first attempt at globalization, breaking up, and then everybody kind of like, you know, goes to their own office and have some conversations, and then they come back. That's the movement. So we'll all get there, but right now it will seem like we're moving backwards for a while.
We have a question from the audience.
I have a different question about another topic, and it's about the incarnation. So if there gets less people to incarnate, like souls incarnate through bodies, will there be a different incarnation in other dimensions, or just a stop, a hold?
Remember that this planet is not important. It's basically, if you said like, you know, if you look at the grains of dust in this room, and it's like, oh, what will happen to all the bacteria if they can't be on that particular grain? It doesn't matter, right? Life is so vast and so big, and there is a multiverse so big, it's impossible to understand that there's life everywhere. So we incarnate wherever we want to based on what's available, right? If we remove this planet completely, nobody would notice. Just like you would not notice if we eliminated like a grain of dust, right? So, but what is interesting though, when it comes to that, because when you have fewer people on a planet, you become more aware of like, what type of people do we want, right? And one thing that is also interesting, we actually go through accelerated evolution faster when the parents are older. You would think that, you know, when you have young parents, let's say like in the old days where, you know, your husband would probably be 20, meaning that he was an accomplished man, and you would be 14 or something like that, right? Or maybe he was like even 25, was like half dying at that point, and then it would have a lot of kids. And the next generation would do the same thing. So the generations would be maybe 15 years, right? Now, when people have kids when they're 40, you basically cut it in half, right? So it moves along a lot slower. But the interesting thing is, and this is also one thing that has not been discussed enough, but is fascinating from a biological standpoint in biological evolution. The only thing women bring to the table are their eggs. So when you're born as a woman, your eggs are already in you. They do not change, right? The only value you have from an evolutionary standpoint is the freshness of your eggs. A man, however, the semen is produced continuously, meaning that what he experiences, what he accomplishes, that will change the genetic profile in the sperm. So when you think of evolution, meaning that you have like microscopical changes in your genes, that's only due to the male. And this is why throughout evolution, you've had the combination of the accomplished male, which means the older one. He has done stuff, he's learned stuff, so he has actually, you know, achieved something that can change evolution. Then you have a young woman with fresh eggs, because whatever she does not contribute to evolution. She can contribute in bringing up the children and teaching them, and thereby be kind of part of shaping the behaviors that may result in a male growing more and therefore influencing evolution more, right? But this is also why men have never been interested in what women do, because men are only interested traditionally in what a woman looks like, because that is the indication of excellent DNA. That's what beauty is. It's excellent DNA. And if she then also seemed like she would be a good mother. So when women want men to be attracted to them for what they do, men don't care about that. It's, you know, the comment that became that internet meme, like, you know, whatever a woman does, like, the question is, but can you twerk? You know, it's that, because it's only about the physical attributes, because a woman cannot influence the genetic makeup in her eggs, while men produce a sperm all the time based on where he's at. This is also why women traditionally have been drawn to accomplished males, because that will be the best semen specimen. It doesn't really matter like who he was when he was a child. is who he has become. Right? So that's always been the natural order of things. Now we are in a different place, but it means also it's very confusing. And men are still attracted to younger women for their beauty, because that's what she's basically bringing to the table when it comes to evolution, right? So, but it's also, something interesting happens. When you, as a woman, in the real old days, you had like 8 to 10 kids and half of them died. You say, meh, because you would basically be pregnant all the time until you died. So it means that you would be less careful and the kids would be allowed to explore more. What happens when you're older and you have one child? That is your entire investment, right? If something happens with that child, you're done. From an evolutionary point of view, your life has been worthless, right? Genetically, this is what we will feel. So then as a woman, you become overprotective because like nothing can possibly happen to this child because like it's all you've got. Your entire line of evolution, right? Through several million years, if your child does not make it, it ends, right? So it becomes so important, and you protect your child, and you will tell your child how special they are, and they will believe it. And everything you do to then protect your child, turn this child into a self-absorbed idiot, right? Because when we feel that we're so special and we're overprotected, we're not really good at surviving. We become too much aware of how we feel because an overprotective mother will always try to figure out how you feel and then compensate. So, yeah, and that means that we will be taught that how we feel is more important than anything, so we try to satisfy our feelings, and that will be our career. That will be our life, and also when we approach relationships, it will all be about how I feel now, how can this partner make me feel better. So it makes everything very difficult. And this social experiment, right, it's first of all, after the Second World War, we've been going downhill for a while, but it's happening faster and faster, right? Because when you have self-absorbed, emotional, snowflakes, it's difficult to have kids, right? And you don't want to because then you're not the main person and you're not special anymore. So it's just part of this whole landscape. There are so many interesting aspects to why we're not having kids anymore, but we're running out of adults. I said this is one way to explain it. Because now, after the Second World War, we had a few generations of people who believed, they could do something with their lives, and they were part of like rebuilding and creating the future and all of that. So they worked, they studied, and they did something with their lives, right? They were not entitled yet. That came later, right? But once one had achieved that, we began with that whole entitlement thing, right? So the last, it was like 3 generations, have been kind of influenced by that. And now, I would say the last of the real hardworking generation, they're now retiring. And snowflakes are taking over. And there are fewer of them, and that's a good thing. But it's also that there are not enough people to do what is necessary. There are a lot of jobs they don't want. The expectations they have to life is higher than what life can actually give them. It's just like a very interesting times. So this is also why we need immigration, right? We need people who still believe in their own future. People who want to like do something with their lives and are not entitled. But it's a fascinating time where we see everywhere in the world where they get to the same level of comfort, they begin having the same thoughts, the same behaviors, the same focus on emotions, and they stop having kids. And if they have a kid, they overprotect them. And then they become too special, and then they become lazy and entitled. It's happening very quickly. And And we just have to adjust to it. And so far, we are reluctant to do so because, again, humans at this point are unable to initiate systemic change because politicians are too focused on the next election, right? So they will always prefer dealing with the symbolic stuff, the things that can stimulate, their constituents or give them more funding, not real issues. And this would take real issues and like a real effort to redesign how the world actually works. We will get there, but it will be painful because humans are not willing to change at this point until they absolutely have to.
We have a question in the audience.
Yes. From my perspective, working with health and nutrition, there's another factor that comes up very clearly for me, and a lot of people are coming to me with fertility issues, for example. And I also see, like, in science, when it comes to health and research, a lot of the research is awesome, and there are so many good things happening when it comes to longevity and health, but there's very little real research when it comes to the consequences of the accumulation of pollution and chemical waste, and also wars. We have a lot of waste, and that also accumulates in our bodies, and very few people are actually aware of the severeness of this and how it also affects our fertility.
Absolutely. And the reason why is because when we as a civilization don't know what to do about it, the best strategy is to pretend, right? That is part of the survival mechanism. If you can't do anything about it, just pretend it's not there, right? In China, they have like several, I would say, not only proverbs, but it's like a value system that unless you can do something about it, pretend that it doesn't exist. You just get on with it because you don't have any alternative. So it's kind of like that, because at this point, the way humans pollute themselves, pollute everything, and impact the world around them in a negative way it's all over, right? It's so, it's in everything, right? So where to start, right? And it would mean to hold corporations accountable, and that will not happen. And we're so far away from this yet, and we'll have to get a lot worse. And people will simply stop doing things because there are better ways, right? The thing is, when we go back in time, many scientists will be able to confirm this, but when you look at old skulls, right? Normally they would have like full sets of teeth. Perfect teeth, right? We're talking about like Whitney Houston, and that was normal. I mentioned this to Andy yesterday, but in Russia, and not a lot of people know this, but it's kind of funny. In Russia a few years ago, because the tundra in Siberia is melting, and they're trying to figure out, like, there are a lot of bacteria here. They can probably kill all of us. Because again, with all the climate changes, there will be so many threats from bacteria, virus, and all of that on top of everything else. But they've been trying to figure things out, and they also found a specific bacteria that will make people resistant to almost all illness and will make them live longer. It's been tested out on animals, and all the animals, they just kept on living because nothing killed them. And one scientist injected himself with it several years ago and has never been sick since. Not a cold, no nothing. And so this also exists, right? So we need to look at solutions that can just repair, that can make us go on, because it's too much. We need better technology. Humans will not change. We cannot change human nature, and the fact is that we have genetic makeup that is the same as they had in the Stone Ages. It's not changed, right? So it means all our urges, all our instincts, a lot of our intuition will be very old, right? And then we meet a modern world with very old programmings, and the priority we have in the brain is not based on us being very wise. It's based on our kind of urges and how this old genetic profile will kind of recognize or guess how it can survive in a world that is completely different from what our genes can possibly understand. So we make very unhealthy choices every time. And even when, because humans are used to living in kind of small groups and tribes, we don't understand a civilization. We don't understand a society. So we don't think, I can do this. Just think of people throwing like a candy wrapper like out the car window. Like, nah. It's that. So once a person like that gets into position, can influence a lot of people, will do the same thing. So you have a lot of these corporations, they can pollute and loot and, steal and kill as much as they want to like it the same. They don't connect with it because money. And that's the only argument, right? Because money, because we want it. No connection to anything else. So we're not there yet. We're not a smart life form yet. So therefore, humans cannot be trusted. Systemic change will have to come because we're forced to. So with a lot of these kind of structures now beginning to break down, we can create something better. But it will take a lot of time. But also, as I said, when people are getting kids later, because also the potential is not just having a self-absorbed kid. It can mean that you can grow up with wiser parents. A lot of people choose to have kids later because they've done something with themselves, right? They've built a life, they've learned things, they've transformed on the inside. And more parents are quite good at teaching their kids values, wisdom, self-connection, all of these things, meaning that the kid can start their life journey with more wisdom and more inner connection. That is happening too. And this is again why when we have kids at a later age, we're at the same time increasing or accelerating the evolution of consciousness in humans, right? But as a society, we have to build a very different machine of civilization. And so far, politicians are completely absorbed in the next election.
So as a Scandinavian, in sort of the wealthiest part of the world, what would be the way to do our biggest part for the human civilization? So he's a spiritual seeker, newly in a relationship, and they're looking at whether to have kids, and they've been thinking about whether is it better to like have your own kids in whatever culture, meaning like have your own biological kids in whatever culture you're in at this point, or would it be better to actually adopt a child from, let's say, a developing country where that child might not survive, so that incarnation would then involve sort of a mixing of cultures? And it's an interesting question of like, is it better to support our own local culture with our child rearing, or is it better to mix the cultures even more with cross adoptions around the world?
Where we are at in our kind of global culture and awakening is that there are so many pathways, so many different ways to do things, and that is part of the way forward. I think when it comes to kids and how we want to have kids or not, it's up to our own journey and our own consciousness and what we want to explore. Remember that when a soul wants to incarnate, they will choose the incarnation that is the kind of tailored rendering of their journey. So they make the decision based on what is actually going to happen. In different dimensions, when we observe from one type of dimension to another, time is not linear. You can move back and forth. So when you choose a lifetime, you've already basically, done the full preview. So you know what this is. You've seen the trailer and then some. So you make the decision based on what will actually happen. So it's more a matter of like, what type of journey is that what type of journey would you like to facilitate, right? If you want a journey that is this way or that way, carries certain values, this or that, that's up to you. And then that soul that needs that experience will incarnate kind of in that form, right? So it's more up to each and everyone to kind of figure out what to do. Now, no matter how many kids you get individually, that will certainly not be able to stop the enormous decline we'll experience over the next couple of generations. The impact most likely will be very close to what we saw during the Black Plague. Because when you think of if half of the population disappears, not because they get killed, but simply because we don't have enough kids. And when they take over, there are not enough people to take over, right? That can be very difficult. Now, like one thing that will happen, of course, because it's about to happen, is robotics, right? Robots will become part of everything. So this is part of the solution, right? And it's kind of fun. When I talk with people about how our relationship with robots will be, the closest thing I get, like, think of your smartphone as a person. That's it. It will not be something weird, mechanical. Just think of how you relate to your smartphone and that becoming a person. And we're very close. Right now, they've gotten to the point where they can kind of mimic human kind of movements, so it doesn't look like a robot anymore. They can emulate kind of organic, normal hand gestures, for instance. And so real kind of functioning robots for the average home, well, we're probably there in like 5 years' time. And from then on, by the end of the century, there will be more personal robots than people. So it will just like everybody's got a car, everybody's got a smartphone. That will become something we have. And then we need less people to do things. So this will be part of the solution, right? And that will be fun. So hopefully, if you get to be like really old and difficult, you will have robot nurses, maybe also robot surgeons, right? So this will just like become a seamless part of our society. And I think of the population decline is what will trigger this for real, because they will be needed in the workforce, right? So it means that we can go around and in our life and live the way we do, yet most of the production will be taken over by robots. Then we'll have to look at the whole economic system, right? Because how do you make money? So all of this will have to be reinvented and changed. And again, politicians, they have no idea yet, right? And that to me is quite interesting and funny, because we're getting to the point where these things are beginning to crumble. They're beginning to dissolve. Things don't work anymore. And we're at the starting point. But politicians should be visionaries. They should be able to plan, decades ahead and plan for all of this. And they're so not. So that will be kind of a rude awakening when a lot of these things begin to happen, and people will be very confused and entitled, and it will be very chaotic. But we'll get on track, right? Humans always do. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we had a question written in by email about how to evaluate this situation with regard to our natural environment or the planet. Like, what is the balance of having more, because at least for the next 20 or 30 years, we're still going to have a lot more people, and an enormous amount of pressure on resources and the environment. So how do you balance the kids versus the environment question for, say, the next generation?
Right. Like the pressure on the environment is our own stupidity. You know, we will probably peak out around like 10 billion people. We're 8 now, because it's starting to stop. So it may be even 10 years from now we've stopped, right? So, and we produce enough food in the world to feed at least 16 billion people. So food production is already at that level. It's distribution. It's how we think around resources. Because again, if we want endless expansion, endless growth, we think of like resources, endless, right? And it's not healthy. So we've gotten to the point where we have to start thinking more circular. We have to think sustainability and all of that. And at some point, the whole planet will be a kind of global functioning culture, which means the whole kind of machinery of production will be in harmony. But it takes artificial intelligence to figure this out. Because remember that more than half of all food that's being produced ends up as garbage, right? Because we don't have systems of distribution and production adjusted to the actual market. So we produce too much, and then you have longevity issues and storage, like all of that. It's very complicated, so we need to come up with better solutions and better foods. This will happen too. So it's not like this planet can't hold this many people. It's like we produce too much, and everything humans produce ends up in the landfill. Very little is recycled, right? Because it's cheaper. When we look at plastics, right? It's cheaper to produce new plastic than to recycle and reuse. For as long as that's the case, you know, and it's this. It's the endless stupidity and the collective consciousness is still refusing the idea of a completely kind of recyclable civilization. And we need to get there. It's not even difficult. All the solutions already exist, right? Everything, but we don't choose them. And we see often when people have great innovations, they go nowhere because the collective consciousness is simply not ready, right? Humans are not smart, especially when it comes to our own kind of greater survival. We understand it on a personal level. You threaten me and I will kill you. We understand that. Even when it comes to our own team, right? So even our own country, you know, this is the enemy, let's go to war. But when it comes to survival, as taking care of things, nurture things the right way, we understand punishment. Think of even, you know, bring up kids. Until very recently, you were supposed to use threats and violence and fear, right? Because that's something we understand. You scare your enemies, you threaten people into good behavior. Back to the religious way of thinking, without the threat of hell, what would stop you from killing and raping all the time, right? So humans understand that part. So fighting over resources, we understand that. Going to war, we understand that. Stealing resources, controlling resources, we understand that. But how to bring balance, how to work together, how to create abundance, how to heal, as a collective life form, humans have no idea. Right? So therefore, we have no emphasis on how to bring balance, right? How to kind of strengthen the ecosystem. We can only fight over it. So this will take some time, because what we need to do is not intuitive for humans. The natural thing for humans, if we think of, you know, us being on an island and we're cutting down all the trees, it's more natural for humans to fight over the trees and keep cutting them down than planting new ones. It's in us, right? So that part of the human brain and the human mindset will have to change. And humans will have to be forced to. So AI will have to come into the picture and basically design new types of workflow. And again, the machine will be global at some point, and humans will be kind of living in it. But it means we'll have 100% recyclable civilization. So we will then be able to focus as a life form on bringing healing to the planet, and we will be restoring the planet and bring back a lot of the species that's gone extinct because the technology will be there, right? But we have to recognize that we've come in many ways to the end of this version of human behavior. And this is why we're experiencing many collapses at the same time, right? It's the birth rate, it's economy, right? It's the whole thing where everything from supply chain to the economy and the globalized economy is kind of beginning to crack. We have the security part, which is military, and all these conflicts. Again, we have the environment. We have the cultural thing where people are more polarized than ever. So we have a lot of things collapsing at the same time because that is what it takes. So it's like we're coming to a point of transformation, right? And when things are done, they will die. There's nothing you can do. And they will. And then we'll figure out something better. But this transformation for many will be quite tough. And the conflicts will be all over the place, right? And it's for us in the spiritual work to be always very positive and look at how can we contribute. And back to what I've said before, you need to have a very clear belief system around yourself and your values. Meaning that the belief system is you interpreting your value system and say, okay, I want to stand for that and that and that. Then how do I imagine living that? And then seeing yourself as that person. And the easiest trick in the book is basically behave as the person you want to become. It's very simple. Then you become that person. So in this situation, we should never be sucked into all the conflicts and negative stories. We need to see the positives. And there are so many positives because, again, the transformation is that we will have fewer people on the planet who live more intentionally. That will be the long-term goal, right? So we live longer, and the emphasis will not then just be in having kids. It's the individual journey. And then souls will incarnate who are taking part in that human experience, right? And of course, you will have kids being born. You know, there will be an industrial production of babies because one already has successfully manufactured artificial wombs, and babies have been born. So this is already happening. That will become the normal way to have kids. And it means that government can produce children without parents, right? So the technology already exists. It's just a matter of getting there. But because of the population decline, a country like China may be the first to do it more systematically, and I think also South Korea. So the technologies and the solutions are here. We just need to get used to it. So kids being born in an artificial womb, robots, all of that creates an enormous freedom, right? We can have fewer people and still produce more. And when it's managed well, it can actually heal the planet, right? So being human, like 100 years from now, 150 years from now, will be so much more fun because we're starting to have a globalized economy and a civilization that actually works and that will be more people-friendly, because the current civilization we have is not for people, it's for corporations and for kind of power structures, right? And the new ones will be closer to what people want. The human journey will become more important. I'm not talking about socialism here. It's not even close to that. When we think of a world where everything that we need is basically manufactured through artificial intelligence and robots and all of that, humans will be able to focus on what it means to be human, to grow, to develop themselves and their talents and bring something in, right? So all that kind of machinery is something we let others do. And many people find this idea to be strange, that, oh, I need a profession, I need a job. And look at all the things in life that we don't do anymore. Most people have a dishwasher, right? Most people also have a washing machine. They have a vacuum cleaner. Again, they have a car so they don't have to walk. We have all these conveniences that simply give us time. So a lot of things we don't do anymore. So we have kind of roboticized our life already, right? It's just making your appliances sentient and with the ability to move and interact, right? It's just a natural progression. So it means we get more time to do what we want to do. And the thing is, most people, when they are confronted with themselves and confronted with people who want them to grow, they will. Is when we have to go in, become a part of a production machinery, right? We work so that we can consume. When that is kind of over, humans will become so much more interesting, because then who you are and what you are as a presence to the world beyond what a robot can be, right? That will be the human journey. But we have to go and move through this shift first, right? So we are looking at the future where there will be fewer people, but better people, more intelligent people, more kind of mature in consciousness and energy. So this is just an enormous shift. And right now, this civilization is, just a train crash waiting to happen. You can see it happening very slowly, and it's fully possible to adapt and change while all of these changes are coming, right? And it's up to each country and also the global consciousness to choose. And that will be the fun part. Remember that this is just a transformation. It's not dangerous. It's not the end. It may be less predictable for a while, but at least next century will be a lot more stable.
All right, we have a question on YouTube directly related to what you're talking about now. Will making money then for survival and having a circular economy be a thing of the past when AI helps us to automate production, and will that then be replaced with a more purpose-oriented economy?
Yes, but not the way we think, because the way we think around these things are often based on where we are now, right? If we think of people making money off of their skills, that's basically what we do today. We get an education and we have skills, and we sell those skills to a company, and they pay us for what we do, and what we do will produce kind of more value than what they pay us, and all of that. Now, when that is gone, humans are still hierarchical. We can say, oh, we're all equal. Yeah, right. You only want to say that when you are in a position of power. The thing is, just like today, we can see the new economy. When we look at influencers, for instance, it's not like that will be the main job, but just think of the idea that people make money off of being themselves, right? So instead of something you have learned necessarily, it's you. What is interesting about you? Finding your own way, finding your own angle, because that's what people want to see. That's what people are paying for, right? And you see that also in design, you know, because in makeup, you know, every single famous celebrity, they now have their own line. It's not like they made the makeup line, right? It's just a company interpreting their personality so that it has a vibe that makes their product stand out, because often, you know, they can have like 10 brands made in the same factory with virtually no changes, but it's that vibe and that energy and people connecting to that, right? So we will see more and more of that. It's what you are as a commodity. So people will be better at being themselves, and this is, the whole educational system will change, right? Because today it's about educating people to become workers and consumers. And that will change, because when you don't have to be a worker and basically anything can be manufactured and printed on demand, so that in itself is not interesting. It's what you do with it and why. So the focus on purpose, why we exist, how we can unpack ourselves, get to know who we are, and how we can bring that into the world, that will be a big part of education. And it's not like when we develop something in ourselves that it necessarily has to be productive for anything, right? It's just, it can be something that is beautiful, right? It's just, how can we contribute to each other's lives, create different experiences, connect. So enhancing the human journey, that's what kind of the human culture will be about. The rest is taken care of, right? And when we look at human history, there have all been changes like this. In the beginning, in the industrialized world, people worked at factories, right? Factory work, coal mines, all of that. Most of those jobs are gone. You still have them in other countries, but what you see happening in the more mature countries, right? We have moved on. Work changes in how we see ourselves, and even the type of jobs we have now. You can see it, that who we are, what we are bringing in, is as important as our skills. You see this in many modern companies, right? They emphasize who you are as much as your skills, right? So we can see this change gradually coming, and when kind of robots and AI take over production, that other part is left, and that can be monetized. So humans will always find ways to be competitive, right? To be special, and to find kind of their path in life. So that will not stop. It will actually be enhanced. Because think of it, so many people today, they have a job that requires them to just like do stuff, right? And then they go home, and they could be replaced easily. Think of if we have a culture where it cannot be replaced, because how you contribute is so unique, and it's recognized that only you carry that, right? It's really interesting. But then it means we have to educate people for a whole different purpose, right? So this will be part of the big shift, right? Because we don't get to know ourselves when we work in a factory, right? When we just do work and get paid. So we limit our consciousness, we limit our expressions, and we limit how we can understand ourselves in our journey. So when that is gone, life will open up, right? And in the beginning, this will take time. Many people will also just basically die because they don't know what to do with it. But over time, the culture will change, and we will truly explore that kind of space and that playfulness. And then healing becomes more interesting, right? How it can bring balance to the planet will become interesting, because we connect. We connect to ourselves, to each other, and that will be the natural next step. So it's a necessary change, but it will be so messy and so confusing, because you will all be able to recognize that there are old structures and as long as people identify with them, they refuse to see that there are other ways we can do this, and they will just see that that will crash. At the same time, new things will emerge. And you should try to identify with that, identify with what is coming. Because everything that is coming through the cracks of the current world will be better.
All right, well, speaking of what's coming, we got a question by email about aging in this transition, because an aging population demands that the aged, or the older people, will have to represent and carry a wider spectrum of the full life cycle going forward. So that includes me, I guess, if I'm going to be aging, and for me, midlife will be 60, so we're going to have to include all of the cycles, like youthfulness, being more in contact with designing my life path, investing in my future, that kind of thing. And that will be a highly interesting shift, and everyone, in a way, can be anything because we have time to explore it. And in that, people will be forced to keep moving, reinvent, and innovate their own relationship to life. And also keep creating more positive ambitions for conducting life in our communities. In business, we see this with life cycles shifting between birth and death and reinvention all the time. But her question really is, how do we better assist our and other people's awareness and facilitation between these stages in people's personal life journeys? Because to her, at least, it's like most people hardly connect with being on a personal journey in this lifetime at all.
True, and it's because we're basically all factory workers, right? And as long as we choose to be that and be that together and to have that type of machinery, it will limit the consciousness. Now, first, what will happen is that people will have to work until they're 80, right? Because when we get older, fewer people, keeping kind of people working will be extremely important. So we will see over the next 10 years that they will try to kind of push the age of retirement more and more and more, because they can't lose their best brains. And what will also then happen is that being young will not be the only thing. Being young is not a skill set. In the current civilization, for some reason, if you're young, that's always better than having intelligence and skill. That will change, because when you see that the whole workforce is now starting to lose their best people, after a while, you will see companies running after them. So that will be interesting. But relating to the journey it is a personal process, right? Awakening is not a collective thing as much. And people are realizing this as a journey will only happen when we are kind of past this phase in history. So when we're no longer factory workers, and we can reflect, and people will start communicating, right? Because now also how we communicate is through gadgets, right? It's often interesting how technology can first disconnect us, and then at some point it will connect us. Because at some point, computers will not be visible. Again, it will be the machine we live in. And then people can connect and be together, and technology will also be partly kind of built into us in ways that we can think and feel the same as other people, and we can share ourselves, and we can connect with others and have kind of collective experiences. And that will be wonderful. So through that, we will become more aware. Like normal people will start to think and feel others, and we'll start to share and reflect, and humans will get better at communication because it will be more interesting, right? The thing is, think of most communication today is about how we can lie, right? Because we are afraid of each other, we are afraid of our own position. Life is a hierarchy and a competition, and you're trying to do your best, so you kind of like, wear makeup emotionally, mentally, physically, and try to sell yourself in all situations, right? And everybody's doing the same. So how interesting are conversations really? Think of getting technology where you can feel and sense what's going on in someone. So you can feel where they're at, their mood, their intention, because you get the same thoughts they do. Right? So you can calibrate and you can share, you can be on the same page. When you talk about something, you can at the same time feel and sense how that person is responding. Right? So it becomes more honest because you can feel when someone's lying. So we will be able to connect deeper because we can understand each other. We'll have technology that will help us develop these kind of parts of our brain so we can share experiences and be there for each other in very new ways, right? Just like technology today can also bring us together through social networks and, FaceTime and all of that. This will be a new level, and this will open up new types of communication, right? Because you can actually feel others, and you will also know whatever is going on in you. You can choose, right? Who will feel you? So they will always know where you're at. This will be part of how we communicate. It's not just like sending messages, it's real-time sensing other people, right? So we will then get a sense of each other. And think when this becomes global, right? And you can then you will learn how to focus on someone, and then you just sense them. And then you can also communicate with them. So we will be kind of a bigger part of each other's lives, and then assisting each other in unfolding what we are. So once we're kind of past this century, humans will begin moving in a direction that is absolutely wonderful. And there's so much potential in the human life form that has not been unlocked yet. Humans can stretch, and as the evolution of humans will accelerate. And just 200 years from now, looking back at these times, it was like, what? It will feel so foreign. But enjoy it, right? And try also be too solution-oriented. It's always looking at what are the benefits, right? What is actually happening? And as I've said, it's because we have outgrown the old form. This is like, a snake shedding a skin. It's simply because what the potentials in the human journey collectively are now too great to fit into the old structures and the old forms. And so we need to work on ourselves as people, as cultures, to be ready for the next step where we begin to connect to each other for real, meaning that we have to see and accept and take part and value each other instead of seeing each other as competitors. We live on this very tiny planet, right? This is like a tiny cruise ship in the universe, right? And everything we do affects everybody else. And humans still don't understand that, right? We have a long way to go, but it's quite natural once we have reached a certain kind of level of global connectedness that everyone freaks out. So now we're in that reaction, and we have to work it out. We have to work out all our kind of primitive ways of thinking and being, and then we'll start moving forward again. But that will not be this current generation, right? It will take time, right? And if you think that the young people are better, no, they're not. They're scream and yell at everyone. It's not. We need to include, right? We need to understand and stop protesting, right? And really kind of learn from history, learn from the future, learn from everyone. And say that when we want to come together, it means we have to listen to everyone. We can't fight someone because they are in a different position. We have to look at why is this working for them, right? And then we have to love each other and include and work together, and we will get there, but not this generation. So spiritually, when we look at the decline, it's also that this paradigm is dying. We often talk about, the new journey for this planet as a new paradigm. It's basically a paradigm is basically a whole set. When you think of laws of nature and variations and certain karmic structures, meaning that everything will be filtered through that space, and that will determine both kind of how far the collective consciousness can go and what can play out. So if I think that's the limited space, and now we have to kind of like shift a little bit and change that space, and then it becomes a new paradigm where the laws of nature operate a little differently and the consciousness is a little higher, and it's just that. But it means in that phase there's no point in enormous amounts of more primitive souls incarnating, because that version of human is being discontinued, right? And then as we then move into the new version, the human journey will be much more fun, and that will also be the time where humans are starting to look at colonizing other planets, right? So then from that point one can have many humans, right? But we need to get there first. So it's completely natural as if we have reached the kind of end of this cycle, and then things will die, things will break down to encourage that kind of shift and that move, and it's happening. So try to be part of that kind of shift and that lift, and when you start seeing, because like over the next 10 years, this will become a topic that is being discussed a lot, and try to look at that and all the other things as it's the same process, right? It's the path for this planet has already been manifested. These are all reactions to that, right? And it opens opportunities. It will incentivize people to leave behind what doesn't work, to move towards a better civilization, right? So that is a wonderful, loving thing. And you should be a wonderful, loving thing too. And right, the greatest challenge I think we have as spiritual people in this kind of phase of human history is to not be part of the fear, right? To not be part of the negativity, because there is so much of it, and there will be more, right? It's important that we all really, really try to be vehicles of love, be vehicles of understanding, including, and going past our own culture, going past everything, every limitation, to see there are limitless ways of being human. And we need to include all of them. We need to welcome every possible way one can be human and say, well, this is how it used to be. That is dying. You should be a birth giver, right? Open up for the incarnation of as much of the new as possible. And for some people, it could be incarnating new thoughts, new emotions, new behaviors, but also inspire people to accept everything that's going on, like, and see the positive changes, where we're heading, right? And to not react with fear. When you look at human history, there's one thing everyone can agree upon. It keeps getting better, no matter what happens. There are explosions of this or that, but when you look at the longer lines, it keeps getting better, and it will keep getting better. That will never stop, right? And humans will continue to get better too. The next step in human evolution is to develop empathy, like real empathy, to focus on healing and growth, and part of that exercise will be restoring the planet and the human life form. All right, so we are in that movement, but we're going downhill fast, and that can give us speed and inspiration, right? So try to be part of that, but also talk with people about where we are at, right? I said there are many things happening at the same time, not the same moment, but when you look at like several decades. try to bring some kind of understanding and order into all of this. Right? Because if you can make people see that this is a shift, and it's a positive one. We have outgrown our current pot, and we have to change pot. And it's not like you go directly from one pot to the next. There is the lifting process and replanting process, right? That is always disturbing. But this is what's happening. Right? So help people see the bigger picture. Help them see the bigger picture, not just for the planet, but for themselves too, and how they want to position themselves. What do they want to vibrate, right? Instead of looking at the fear, help people see what is actually happening, what is actually opening up. And as I said, one important practice is we need to accept everything. Practice to embrace every culture in the world. One thing you can do, like read books, go on YouTube, watch, TV from different cultures, right? Be a person that is able to include everything in the world and to really take in this whole planet and all life forms, right? All cultures, all ways of being human, and really try to be a kind of transformer for that love. Because now we're in the phase where people are trying to make everyone an enemy, right? And the antidote is doing the opposite. So confront yourself in your own life when you have dislikes, because that's part of the collective consciousness. We will more easily dislike other people and criticize how things are, how strong political opinions. Then we're part of the problem. We need to go in the opposite direction. Try to cut through your own bias. Try to see that the solution is to love and include and accept absolutely everything and everyone unconditionally, right? And practice that as an attitude, right? Explore instead of protect and defend. Right? Become that person and bring it into conversations, because over the next decades, these types of conversations will be important, right? When you look at the polarized political climate in the States, right, where people just make up fantasies and then try to make policies based on those fantasies, that will happen in many other countries too, right? As spiritual people, we need to be better. We need to cut through and operate from a greater picture, right? And in the decades to come, people will become more biased. They will become more scared, more opinionated. They will become more confused. It will be difficult to navigate, but not if you operate from a greater image, right? So it's our responsibility to vibrate that and offer our opinion. This is part of why IKYA Live is important, right? It is also to assist all of you to understand how to talk about what's going on in the world in a way that can make sense for people, not politically, but spiritually. So they can be kind of part of it and feel that there is order, there is purpose. So kind of, if you want to, and like when it comes to this topic, there is an increasing amount of information. Educate yourself, right? Take part in the conversations, because this is the ultimate goal of IKYA Live, is to assist all of you to being an active part in the conversations in your life, with your friends, colleagues, all of that, and also carry a higher vision, right? Because in discussions, especially when it comes to politics and what's happening in the world, people lower their consciousness. So if you can be a vehicle for higher consciousness and then be part of the conversations, you're actually helping a lot. Do we have any more questions?
We do have one more question. It was, there does seem to be a resurgence of people wanting more traditional relationships, kind of against the trend. How do you see that? Some people call it the trad wife or traditional wife movement. How do you see that movement, which also often combines multiple families, co-creating communities, homeschooling, sort of in a way pulling away from the public system of creating, consuming robots, basically. Does that movement have any role in this shift going forward?
Absolutely. I think that movement is wonderful because what they're trying to do is to go back to classic values. And it's basically how humans have behaved throughout history, what values have been important. Because we've kind of lost track of that as a civilization. So there's definitely room for that, and I think it's important. It's, in a way, a positive conservatism. And it doesn't fit everyone, but as part of also reconnecting to what are we doing and why, and also restoring the importance of family, I think it's a wonderful movement. But again, that will fit some people, and some people will, want to go in the opposite direction, and that's fine too. This is part of that kind of life on the planet that we're slowly moving into, that there are many different ways to be human, right? And the fact that you find your way to be human should not dictate how other people should be human. And it's wonderful that you can have people who choose to live a very traditional family life with those values, and then you can have, the polygamist, woke people living next door, and that should be fine, right? We are different, and that is wonderful. We need to open up and allow every possible way to be human and figure out, okay, how can we be that together? And that will only be truly possible when we're not factory workers anymore, right? So all these things are happening at the same time, right? Because we've come to a point where in the human journey where we really have to move past this level so we can continue with meaningless jobs. We need automation so that we can focus on being us and then explore different ways to be, right? But it is important, I think, for society to have discussions around values. And then when you have these discussions, you will discover the traditional values. And they work. They're closer to our genetics. It creates stability. So I think that movement is wonderful. And it's part of the exploration, right? I always say that I'm 100% in favor of absolutely everything because I am. When somebody makes a choice, it's because they need to make that choice and they need to explore the consequences of that choice, and someone else may explore something else, right? Our world is too tight. We have too few options because our cultures are too narrow-minded. Our belief systems are also, they're too tight. This is the future, that everyone can find their path and their kind of version. Think of also, when you look at music today, right? Young people, they can listen to music from the last 80 years. It's not necessarily just what's popular right now because we have access to everything, right? It removes the timeline and opens up more of a landscape, right? And so it is with values and how we want to live. In the future, life will be much more like that. You'll be able to subscribe to different values, belief systems, how you want to live, and we'll all be part of the same landscape, right? It's available. You could just figure out your path. And this is why the current civilization has to kind of not be broken down completely, but it has to kind of break or crack. Because we need to be more. Humans want to be more. And of course, as humans become more spiritually aware, they will definitely not spend their lives in a factory, right? They want to explore, they want to unfold. And that will become what humans are doing. And then we will be doing wonderful things. Remember that human sciences have just started, right? Most things have not been discovered yet. So it's like now we've figured out everything, we're just getting started. So the human civilization will become better and better and more fascinating. Humans will be better. So this shift is necessary, and it's also for you to kind of utilize that opening and try to find out what your path is. How do you want to be human? You know, you don't have to accept the default version of human, right? You can invent your own version of the human journey, right? Because this is also part of where we're heading. Your journey is important to you, right? So you should utilize whatever this world has to offer and figure out how you can make this journey memorable and unique to you, right? And you can do that now. This is why there has never been more opportunities on the planet than right now. We've never been able to achieve more than right now. But then we have to think, we have to connect to who we are, right? And make use of everything. Otherwise, we can just fall asleep as consumers and then we'll, be dead inside. But we can also do the opposite, right? So it's up to each and every one of us to utilize our lives to really, wake up and to be creative and be playful. Because even though we are going through a phase where there are many collapses happening, what is coming instead is also present in the same space. So that is where we need to aim spiritually, right? So when you work on expansion of consciousness and you work on what type of human you want to be, what type of human journey you want, what type of spiritual contribution you want to give to this world, right? Just see this wonderful transformation, be part of it, and be part of the solution, right? We should always point forward. We should always be the people who are kind of like standing outside the tunnel of transformation and showing people where they're going, right? We can always show the example. So we can always love more, have more compassion, have more love, have more understanding, give more of ourselves, contribute more to, people and beings around us, having a healing focus. All of these things we can do now, right? And as spiritual people, we have that responsibility because we know. Other people who are asleep, they don't yet, right? So if you want this shift to move as comfortably and swiftly as possible, that is what you can do, right? Be someone who actively heals. Not from everything is wrong and this needs healing, but when you love, when you accept, when you have compassion, and when you embrace, right, then you heal. Right? Because it's a consequence of you loving and accepting and embracing everything. So the more people who are doing that and who are living that, they are living that new consciousness, they're living the solution. Right? And then we can assist people who will be increasingly afraid and confused. So, fewer kids is not the end. Again, it may look like it because we're not taking new technology into consideration yet. We're not taking into consideration that we're shifting the human incarnation to be longer. So we learn and grow and become wise before we die. It's an upgrade, which means we need fewer people. We'll bring balance and harmony to this planet. We need fewer people. Life will be more fun. There will be more space, more exploration, less stress. The human journey is about to become the most amazing it has ever been. But first, humans will have to let go of all of their resistance to it and their addiction to suffering. So, as always, the solution is in the heart. It's in living from love, having love as the intention. And always when you focus on the future, look at this as being the most kind of wonderful transformation of upliftment and love in human history. As always, be the solution, right? Live as the solution. Only then have your credibility. And then when we set the example, we're pulling people with us in a direction of love and healing and growth and a lot of fun.
Thank you, IKYA, and thank you all for joining us tonight for IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and your premier news program for practical spiritual advice for your everyday life, which we hope you got in abundance tonight. So please share tonight's episode with fellow spiritual seekers, family, friends, so that we can expand this conversation and assist others in seeing this situation from a different perspective. And we'll be back with you then next Monday at 19 o'clock Oslo time, both online here on YouTube Live and here at IKYA Center in Oslo, Norway. And until then, we wish you a beautiful week.